Okay, we're back. We're live. It's 12 o'clock rock, or almost 12 o'clock anyway, here on a given Wednesday. And of course, that means we do education, movers, shakers, reformers in education. The context is that a few months ago, we had our host, regular host, Carl Campagna, and his guest was Georgiana DeCosta. She's the executive director of the Meth Project. And they were talking about, I guess, the Meth Project and personal things as well. And in the process, her relative, who is with us today by Skype from Maui, Andrea DeCosta, was listening, and Andrea wanted to join into this conversation. So I welcome you, Andrea DeCosta, on Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Welcome to Think Tank.
Thank you for having me this afternoon.
So first of all, you had some thoughts about that show. You watched it, and I'm interested in your thoughts about it.
Well, I watched it, and as always, I completely support both Carl Campagna's efforts as well as my sister Georgiana DeCosta's efforts to curb the use of methamphetamines in our community. It definitely is a drug that has had its adverse effects on a community. But I think that there have been some misunderstanding about the circumstances surrounding the death of my own daughter, who, while she had been a methamphetamine addict at one time in her life, she recently passed away, but she did not pass away as a result of methamphetamine use. She actually passed away as a result of improperly treated severe and acute behavioral health disease that ultimately culminated in her taking different types of medication that caused her to fall into suicidal ideation, and she shot herself with a handgun that was purchased for home protection. So I think underlying both the methamphetamine use as well as the prescription drug issue is the fact that we have a problem in our community with behavioral health, and we're trying to find different ways to deal with behavioral health. And some of the ways that people are finding to deal with their behavioral health problems might be to escape into using illicit drugs or using prescribed medication in a way that is not helpful to them.
Yeah, so you're an advocate for healthcare education, and in fact, mental health care education, and you've been doing that for a while. And I wonder if you could describe what you consider the state in the state of Hawaii, the state of mental health care education. Are we doing enough? What are we doing, and is it working?
Well, I think that there are a lot of wonderful people out there who have dedicated their lives to helping the community to overcome our health issues, including our behavioral health issues. I think one of the problems or challenges that we might be experiencing right now is that there might be a certain amount of stigma associated with behavioral health. And because there is stigma, as well as a lack of education, real awareness regarding behavioral health disease and what it looks like, then people may be inaccurately diagnosing the issue. They may also be hiding their behavioral health disease because they have a fear about what will happen to them if they are a healthcare provider, for example, or some other kind of professional. So in my daughter's situation, she was on the brink of becoming a licensed social worker. She probably did need to be in a very intensive inpatient program, but she resisted this because she thought that she could handle it on her own. And I think that that was a mistake. So I think that the rest of the community has an obligation to make sure that we are addressing the behavioral health problems that we might see in our own families, and giving people like my daughter who wanted to be a professional social worker the opportunity and the support system to be able to do that without first hurting themselves.
So what are the telltale signs people should be looking for, first to, do enough of a homespun diagnosis that they can recommend some, further treatment for somebody who maybe have a mental health issue?
Well, in our situation, what I found is that my emphasis was on observation. I spent a lot of time observing my child, being aware of her different moods, trying to look out for her as much as possible, giving her um, giving her opportunities to discuss her problems with us. But one of the biggest things that I have found is that there is a reluctance of so many people to, once they become adults. So when they're your children, and they're directly under your control or your observation, it's easier to be able to deal with these issues. But sometimes it could be a coworker or another relative who is an adult, and it may not be so obvious. So I think maybe some of the telltale signs could be is that they're withdrawing. So if you have a relative, you have a friend or a family member who is withdrawing from the community, withdrawing from involving in activities, maybe you're trying to call them and they're not responsive to you. And things, for example, in my daughter's situation, on Facebook, everything appeared as if it was kosher. But that a lot of that was really just smoke and mirrors. So we also want to be able to sift through some of that. If you're seeing somebody posting something on Facebook, but you're not able to connect with them and discuss with them what's happening in their lives, then there's some sort of disconnect. There's something going on. And people with behavioral health care issues, I think, have become very adept because of the level of discrimination that they have experienced. I think that they have become very adept, like some other individuals in the community who may have experienced discrimination. They've become adept at hiding their issues. But I think that removing themselves from activities, not being involved, I think that's one of the most obvious keys that there's a problem.
Yeah, so interesting. So, will this, can you tell from the conduct, from the pattern of conduct, whether it's a serious problem or maybe just a shy problem or maybe just a withdrawal that is not pathological?
Well, I'm not a licensed social worker myself or mental health care provider myself, but as a licensed healthcare provider, what we're always looking at is for effect, right? So we're looking at somebody's effect. We're wanting to see is whether or not we can get them to smile, whether or not we can get them to engage us, right? So I think that even for somebody who is not a licensed healthcare professional, the key might be in trying to elicit some responses from that individual, try to get them engaged, try to speak with them. And I think through this process of trying to engage the individual, you will be able to tell whether or not there's an issue. If, of course, it's something very severe and the person is not able to speak with you, or maybe you're not in a position to provide them with the right kind of advice, it doesn't hurt, I think, to just take them out for a walk. I know that when my daughter was alive, one of the things that her father did, and I credit him with this part, one of the things that he would do with her from time to time is take her out for walks. So sometimes just getting out in nature, getting away from the situation that you're involved in, being able to remove yourself from a stressful environment can make all the difference in the world for that moment. And it will go a long way toward building trust between the people who are trying to help you and the person that has the problem. But I really think that at the end of the day, there really is there's no quick fix. I think that what we really need to do as a community is agree that we are going to end any kind of discrimination, the same way that we have worked to end discrimination against people of color, the same way that we have worked to end discrimination against women, the same way that we have worked to end discrimination against people that are gay, lesbian, or transvestite. I think that we need to work to end discrimination against people that have behavioral health care problems, because in helping to end the stigma, more people will come out of the shadows. Right now, Hawaii is 14% above. The rates of behavioral health disease are 14% above the national average. And a lot of those people are not getting help. That means that the guy who's driving our bus, sometimes even our own healthcare providers, they're not getting the kind of care that they need because of the stigma. And
I just want to ask you about some intersections here.
Certainly.
One intersection would be young kids or possibly millennials, who are not as young as teenagers, but they're young. Another intersection would be Hawaii. Hawaii is a special culture. And sometimes people, it's an island culture, among other things. And being on an island makes you want to protect your reputation, not expose yourself, perhaps in a different way than other places. Finally, you talked about issues about gender. Maybe that is an intersection point. And finally, drugs, like meth, that may be an intersection point too. So could I ask you to discuss those four factors and tell me how they play in diagnosing the problem, spotting the problem, as a layperson, and in taking action on it?
Certainly. Well, to me, youth is actually the heart of it right now. My sister Georgiana has worked for many years as a recovering methamphetamine addict, as well as somebody who directs the program locally. She's worked for many years to encourage youth to get out there, to get involved, to assist their peers, and to really break down some of the barriers that may have existed with regard to substance abuse. And I think that we can take some of those same successes that my sister has experienced with their meth project and apply that to the youth project. But I think that one of the things that we really want to look at is maybe increasing the instances where we have more peers who are assisting other peers who may have gone through rocky periods of time. When it comes to youth, and especially when it comes to suicide, I know that one of the things that they are really worried about is copycat behavior. So we want to work with people who are professionals, who are trained in these types of programming, to make sure that the youth understand what is valuable about being alive, and why we want to cherish being alive, and why we want to mitigate the instances of suicide, not glorify them, not turn people into heroes, or some kind of after the fact, they died because they weren't being heard. We want to protect those people and insulate them from those types of scenarios without glorifying someone's death. So I think that the youth could probably benefit from more education, and more education from people who may perhaps have been there. I know that there are a lot of people in Hawaii who have struggled within our own family. Besides my daughter committing suicide, the fact that my father was an alcoholic for so many years, I consider that a slow suicide. So, we have to think about maybe increasing the value of human life while we're alive and while we're living, and helping youth to appreciate the hand that they're given, regardless of what their circumstances might be.
Andrea, we're going to take a short break.
Okay.
I'd like to discuss those other threads right after this break. That's Andrea DeCosta. She joins us by Skype from Maui. We're talking about mental health care education. We'll be right back.
Aloha, I'm Chantel Seville, host of the Savvy Chick Show on Think Tech Hawaii. This show is for you. It's all about inspiring and empowering girls of the future to do what they love, get out there and be healthy, fit, and confident. If you're up for that, 11 a.m. every Wednesday, I'll see you there.
Hello, I'm Stephen Katz, and I'm the host of Shrink Wrap, which comes to you live every Tuesday at 3 p.m. on thinktechhawaii.com, and then it's repeated again whenever you want if you go to the website. On our show, we will be talking to all different kinds of therapists, psychologists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, people who talk about the mind, the brain, and about different ways to find happiness. I myself am a marriage and family therapist in practice here in Hawaii, and I hope you will join us, because I've got a lot to learn, you've got a lot to learn, and it's a great ride. Thanks a lot. See you soon.
Coming back. Okay, we're back. We're live with Andrea DeCosta. She joins us by Skype from Maui, and she's talking about things that are very important to our community, namely mental health care education. She had a tragic loss of her own daughter, and she's very sensitive on the issue, and she's willing to discuss it with us, and we greatly appreciate that, Andrea. In any event, we wanted to pursue some of those other threads I mentioned. You spoke about the youth thread, teenagers and millennials and the like. What about the thread of local culture? It seems to me that in Hawaii, you have people who really are reluctant to talk about their state of mind. They're reluctant to expose themselves to, to community pushback, to community harassment about mental health issues. And I also wanted to ask you about the interrelationship of drugs, and that includes alcohol. You've touched on that. And finally, gender issues that have been in the news so much lately.
Certainly. Well, because Hawaii is such a unique place and there is a diversity like no other type of community, I think that we often try to be overly sensitive um, to keeping up appearances. I know that that happens quite a bit in the Kanaka Maoli, the Native Hawaiian community. So, say for example, in our family, I doubt very much that it would be thrilling for my mother to have thought years before this that she would someday in the future listen to both of her children discussing mental health disease or substance abuse. But fact of the matter is, because we have to deal with some of the genetics that go along with it, um, we're kind of stuck with the hand that we're dealt. And in Hawaii, because we have such a small area and a relatively large population, there are a lot of different types of people that have to learn to get along. And I think that for the most part, people do a really great job. But one of the things that I think often gets overlooked and swept under the rug is this whole notion of behavioral health as it's linked to substance abuse or alcohol use. So, for example, I was looking at some of the SAMHSA reports, and SAMHSA references, the fact that Hawaii's alcohol use and illicit drug use is actually higher than the national standard. Well, I think if we were to dig a little bit deeper, we would realize that the reason for the higher rates of drug and alcohol abuse in Hawaii have to do with the higher rates of behavioral health disease. And perhaps we're not addressing those issues because everybody is so afraid of getting judged by their next door neighbor. And we haven't gotten to the point yet where we've really truly accepted that there is a parity between a physical disability and an emotional or mental disability. So, for example, in my scenario, even for myself, prior to my daughter passing away, I had suffered for many years with anxiety and PTSD as a consequence of having to be a caregiver to a child who had, severe behavioral health disease, who was diagnosed as bipolar at a very young age, who had been institutionalized in multiple states over several year period of time. So for me, even there was a lot of stigma sharing that story, and I didn't share that with a lot of people. I shared it with my family, but even then, I may not have gone into the details. And again, because when you share things with your family, most of the time we want to be able to share positive things. We certainly don't want to tell our parents, well, remember that little girl who's so great at cheering and is able to perform all of these athletic feats and is a straight A student. Well, she also suffers from severe depression, and she's been diagnosed as bipolar. And somewhere along the line, she was molested by a family member on her father's side of the family, and that contributed to this health disease. So, we have to look at how all of those things kind of configure. And when you're dealing with people in a small community, everybody wants to put on their best face. Nobody wants to be judged by the next guy. And I think now is the time for us to kind of take our mask down, because if we want to save lives, we're going to have to really wrestle with this notion that imperfect is okay, and being imperfect is not the worst thing under the sun. I've been accused of being angry at times when I have called out politicians for different things, and perhaps some of that anger also comes from a place of having some anxiety or behavioral health disease. So we have to look at all of these things and look at how it affects us as a community, and stop being afraid of being judged. So, if we can get past that and we can accept that a behavioral health disease is no different than having a physical disease, and we wouldn't tease someone or judge somebody that has a physical disease, I think that we will be able to make some progress. And I think that we're actually on our way. And the reason why I can tell that we're on our way is because of the fact that people who were former heavy drug users and are now in recovery, like my sister and some of her other cohorts, those people are really thriving, and those are the people that are really driving the discussion when it comes to drug addiction and substance abuse. So by that same token, a couple of months ago, you had several ladies on your program that were speaking about mental health disease. And one of them admitted that the reason why she went into practice, and she's been in practice for 30 years now, is because of her own behavioral health disease. My daughter, Elizabeth, that's exactly why she went into into social work. She went into social work because at a very young age, she was diagnosed as being bipolar, and she realized that it was a problem. And it's really not something that she can think her way out of. And I'm not even sure if it's necessarily something that we could medicate our way out of. So that's another, for a small community, we really need to think about how many people are medicated as a result of behavioral health disease, and if that's something that's acceptable, because that links into not just alcohol use, but illicit prescription drug use and drug abuse.
Yeah. So if you see somebody who is impaired by drugs, that person may actually fundamentally have a mental health issue.
Well, actually, at the heart of it, in a way, so one of the projects that I'm working on with a researcher from the Queens Cancer Research Center is a method, a tool that will help to diagnose cancers earlier. So you can figure out where along your gene line there's some cancer existing in your genetic makeup. Well, in the same way that cancer is oftentimes latent, because everybody is born with basal cells until they express themselves because they've been triggered in some way. I really believe that behavioral health is the same way. I think that behavioral health disease can be latent to a certain extent in so many of us, and then be triggered by certain events that occur in our lives. So, for example, with my daughter, she had reported to me before we moved from Virginia back, or after we moved from Virginia back to Hawaii, she had reported to me that while she was on a summer vacation with her father, that she had been molested by a family member, one of her, I guess a step uncle or something. And I think that was what triggered her latent behavioral health disease. It caused her to experience PTSD. The PTSD led to anxiety. The anxiety helped to uncover the depression that was both inherited by her grandmother. So her paternal grandmother had severe depression and was an alcoholic and had cleaned up her act until recently. So not too long ago, my mother-in-law, my daughter's paternal grandmother, herself, who was suffering from bipolar and depression most of her life, passed away. My father passed away at age 49, so at the same age that I'm now, and that I am at now, my father passed away in large part because of untreated behavioral health disease. So yes, he may have been an alcoholic, but that was just the weapon that he used. For my daughter, she used a gun. She had been taking Wellbutrin and Xanax together, and I'm not sure that they were a very good combination. For some reason, she had suicidal ideations as a consequence. She was able to gain access to the gun, and she shot herself. So that was her ultimate weapon. But there's so many other people who commit suicide, and they do it with other weapons, and underlying it is a behavioral health disease.
Okay, so we have to educate the public about this, and the public includes parents and friends, members of the family, whatnot, who can spot these things and can look at these various vectors, including one that I hadn't listed, but when you raised, and namely that you look at, you look at your family, you look at the parents or grandparents and see what happened with them, and maybe that's an indicator to be aware of in evaluating a child. But once you see something that troubles you, what do you do? What steps do you take, especially with a child? Who do you call? What kind of care do you get?
Well, National Alliance for Mental Illness is probably one of the foremost authorities, and they have a lot of resources at their website. As a parent, what I did when we were faced with this issue, and most people who are dealing with an acute issue, like say, for example, somebody who is either hurting themselves, like in my daughter's case, she had been cutting herself, or people who are, actively suicidal, you're required to take them to the ER room. Unfortunately, the way that the system is set up, if none of the other measures help, if psychoanalysis or if talk therapy doesn't help, and if none of the prescription medication works, you're required to take them to the ER room to get them some sort of treatment. And I think what we need to do, rather than waiting to that point, rather than waiting to the point where somebody's that severe, I think we need to do some other things. But that's where I think that we're actually lacking. So even as a parent, I struggled because I don't have depression. I could not see depression the way that my daughter saw it. So in a way, I was looking through a completely different lens than my daughter when I was thinking about what she needed. And more, I'm starting to become convinced that I need to start listening to the people who have suffered from this disease, from behavioral health disease, rather than thinking, well, I have the cure for it, or I know what might be the answer. So in a simplistic way, we want to believe that we could get people engaged in other activities, get them involved in sports, which is what I tried with my daughter. I actually compensated her. I told her if she did all of her schoolwork and she stayed involved in her sports, then she would get compensated the same way as if she had a job. So she was incentivized, and I think it worked out. And in our situation, after several different therapeutic programs, inpatient and intensive outpatient programs.
So what's your advice, Andrea, to someone who sees these signs? Who do they call? They pick up the phone, who do they call?
I think that the first person that they probably want to call is somebody who is a licensed behavioral health care counselor, either somebody at school. If the child is in school, contact that person, or contact somebody who has been referred to them and that might specialize in some of the behaviors that the child is exhibiting.
A psychologist or a psychiatrist?
A psychiatrist, or a social worker. One of the things we probably need to understand is what jobs each of the behavioral health care providers do. Social workers probably do a lot more intensive talk therapy. So I think psychiatrists probably do a lot more medication therapy. But the main thing is we need to pick up the phone and contact somebody if we don't have the tools to be able to talk with our child and to help them, or talk with our loved one and help them.
We'll have to leave it there, Andrea. That's good advice.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate your time coming on and discussing this with us. That's Andrea DeCosta, a healthcare education advocate, joining us by Skype from Maui, talking about the impact of behavioral health on families and community. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jay. I really appreciate it.
Aloha, Andrea.
Aloha.